Okay, I'm starting the video now. So I'm in Beacon. I have major roads, recreational trails, geocoded streets. I have parcels and building footprints turned on. I have water features turned on, but I have the aerial photography turned off. And so it gives me the lots, it gives me building footprints, it gives me the roads. These are the things I need to make a competent diagram or the beginning of a image in SketchUp that we can use. So that's potentially really exciting. What I'm going to show you is how to bring this into SketchUp and scale it so that it becomes something that's usable that we can draw over and diagram over. Okay, but we're still in Beacon, and we need to. It's a little bit, can be a little bit fidgety. Oh my goodness, you know, it depends on really good internet, right? And we have to get this into a size that is going to export a pretty appropriate size for our use. We then go to this print setup button, which is third from the right, print setup. And here we will determine all of the information that goes into our map download. We choose the paper size, we choose the print quality, we choose the target map scale. There are other ways to do this. There are analog ways to do this. There are digital ways to do this. This is the fastest way to get a scale map out of Beacon GIS. Okay, so I pick 11:17 landscape. I pick high quality. We then have to determine what scale is going to export. Okay, so if we choose 1 to 200 feet and have everything else turned on, we then click print as PDF. We wait for wonderful internet, wait for our wireless, and then you'll notice it has this much area. If you were to choose a different scale, like 1 to 100, you would probably only see the school, at least when I tried it an hour ago, you only see this much. Because 1 to 100, that's what fits on 11:17 sheet paper. And 1 to 200, this is what fits on 11:17 sheet paper. In order to have information to make some digital diagramming from it, this is pretty good, right? And it has a scale that's absolutely married to the image. Once we get there, in my browser, and this is just a Chrome thing, you come up to here to download, and then tell it where to go. I can't bring a PDF into SketchUp. They won't let you at all. So it has to be converted into a JPEG. So if we go to Photoshop, delete this stuff. So I've got to open that new PDF in Photoshop, source site, open. When Photoshop opens a PDF, it asks you some questions. Okay, who are you? Are you not? It says, do you want Photoshop to crop this to something like the bounding box? Yes, I do. Do you want Photoshop to size this in some sort of fashion? This is pretty good. This is the default. What resolution do you want this to be? Do you want it to be at 200, 300, 100, whatever the case may be? We made a 300 dpi PDF when we exported from Beacon, so I want to change that to 300. And I don't want to constrain proportions because that could affect the scale. So that PDF is now a JPEG. Now keep in mind, if you're doing hand diagramming, this is ready to print because you've got a scale already married to it, and you can use your 1 to 20 engineering scale, add 1 0, and you can put lay trace over this and start going down immediately, right? Because that's a workable scale that you can use for drawings and doing it analog. So this is already ready to print. But to bring it into SketchUp or into Illustrator, bring it into SketchUp, it has to be a JPEG. Illustrator, it can be a PDF. So this is now a JPEG. We then save it as a JPEG. So store site, JPEG, save, and that becomes something that we can bring into SketchUp. So I minimize Photoshop. Close up Sketchup, just so we can start. I can start from the beginning. When we open Sketchup for the very first time, it's going to ask you some questions. It will ask you what template are we using. Okay. Architectural template is feet and inches. So all of the numeric values that we will enter into SketchUp will be divisions of feet and inches. The planning template is an engineering template. It's in tenths of feet, which is the same as surveying, engineering surveys, the way that those are measured with tenths of feet. So know that if you're reading off of a survey document, you want to use the urban planning or the civil engineering or the landscape architecture template. If you're still thinking in feet and inches, use the architectural template. Okay? So the architectural template has this gray background with this interesting hipster wearing a map of Michigan. I'm going to get rid of him, even though he's from Michigan and obviously fabulous. I'm going to then import that JPEG that we just made. So I need to go to my desktop, find that JPEG that we just made. Understand that we need to tell SketchUp that we're looking for a JPEG. A lot of folks get tripped up right here in terms of file format. Okay, so we're looking for a JPEG. Store site, import, and then I lock it to the axis and then pull it up just a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit until it's there. Okay? And I'll zoom extents, then orbit, and now this image that we just made, we took a PDF from Beacon, we turned it into a JPEG, now we're importing that image into SketchUp. Any questions so far? Still in solid. Yep. Okay, so we've got that in. We've imported as a JPEG, but it's not scaled, is it? Yeah. So to scale the model, I want to zoom in just over our little scale bar, that little 200 foot right there. See this little guy hanging out in the lower left-hand part of the model. And then I want to pick my measuring tool, looks like a tape measure. Then I want to get that as close to this as possible and then make a line as close to that as possible. Then I click, and then without doing anything else, I type in to my numeric keypad 200 single quote. What does single quote mean on the keyboard? Feet. Okay, in construction language, single quote, not double quote, single quote means feet. Press enter. SketchUp will ask you, do you want to resize the model? And I say, yes. And then I zoom extents. Zoom extents is the lens, the little magnifying lens with 3 arrows coming out of it, and now that model is scaled. Okay, I'll stop the video. All right. The measuring tool obviously has that capacity to drag a linear segment, but for us, when we're working on a site here, one of the more interesting tools and perhaps useful tools is when we can start to make some guidelines. To make a guideline, there is a toggle underneath the measuring tape. You can see the secret to the toggle is down here in this lower line. Select pointer edge to measure from. Option on the Mac equals toggle to create guides. On the PC, it's the Alt key. So if you hit the Alt key, you will then toggle this tool that allows you to create guidelines from an existing line, but it has to be an existing line. So you toggle that, you'll see a guideline being pulled from the boundary of the image itself. Now, you cannot make guidelines from nothing. It has to come from either an edge or from a line that you have drawn in SketchUp. Not all of these lines are parallel. So I will now draw a line here for our southern boundary because I believe that that is at an angle. Then hit escape. Escape is your friend in SketchUp because it stops whatever you're doing. And then now I can pull guidelines off of that diagonal line on that lower part of the boundary. So let's say, hypothetically, we've decided that there's a 100-foot setback. So 100 single quote, that's now a 100-foot setback guideline off of the southern end of the property. If I go over here and draw a line on the western side of the property, I then hit escape. I go back to my measuring tool. It's still toggled. It's still toggled. We have to toggle it off and on if we want to use this particular feature. And I decide I want a 100-foot setback on the western boundary, and so forth. So you can make guidelines from existing edges or boundaries, but you cannot make them from nothing. So as you start to show the parameters, potential parameters of your site, or if you're following a certain setback, or if the neighborhood says we'd like a setback, or your zoning ordinance says thou shalt have a minimum setback, these guidelines will help you to start to think within the constraints and guidelines of your site. Yes?
Why would there be a setback?
Why would there be a setback? Setbacks are legislated for every house in this particular neighborhood. You can see a uniform setback creates enough land area for the right-of-way, utilities, the roads, all those different things to pass through from the center line of the roadway itself. It creates fire separation between houses. It creates opportunity for minimum front yard, backyard, and light penetration into each house. Those are the general purposes for setbacks, because those setbacks then tell us where we can place buildings on the lot sizes, depending on what that lot size is used for. So this side I believe is R1. This side is R3. There are minimum setbacks calculated for all lot sides, depending on the zoning classification. So these minimum setbacks for in-between houses, either boundary lines, minimum setbacks for the front and backyard, allow for the maximum amount of utility and roadway to be placed, sidewalks, all those things, if that minimum setback is enforced. Okay? You cannot build if you are violating that setback unless you file a variance. And often when we're redeveloping a site like this, or placing a school or something like that, a large lot like this, a minimum setback will potentially be written into your zoning ordinance that says any new construction has to be set back a number of feet in order to be approved. So I'm just kind of saying hypothetically, if we were to think about a minimum setback, then you can see the school was roughly 100 feet setback from that street. Okay. You can also then say, hey, I'm thinking about maybe building a grid. I'll build a grid here, and you can reference some of the existing streets that are feeding into the property. And you can start to build an ordering system based on some of the things that you're already seeing there. So we noticed see that street over there, yonder, at the eastern boundary. If we see the 3 streets on the northern boundary, these are things that we could potentially build a grid from, if that's what you're interested in. If that grid is something that's important to you as a planner, to think about, well, maybe we want to think about connectivity coming through. And so making a grid of these guidelines can really help you start to see what could happen here. And we can see the angles, and so there's a beginning of an ordering system just based on patterning or following the existing streets and setbacks, well, from lot line to lot line here. The road is in between this right-of-way. ROW. The right-of-way is determined between the two, the area between the two lot lines. There's a center line there. The roadway is constructed from the center line to the left and to the right. But that roadway may change. You may add sidewalks there, you may add a lane, you may put in a bike lane. The right-of-way is the public right-of-way from the center line to the lot line. And so the public, the private ownership is within the lot line there. The public right-of-way might be very much larger than the street itself. That's where all the utilities go, that's where all the parking goes, that's where all the bike lanes go, that's where the sewer goes, that's where water goes. All those things happen in the public right-of-way. Okay? All right, once I've got an ordering system now, I can start doing land use. So I can start thinking about land use. So if I go back to Canvas here, and I keep my land use colors as a reference. Make sure I keep that in the corner or as a reference, just drag it over to my other screen, just so I remember what I'm doing. And we can start having some fun here. So maybe this is a new street. It's going to want to close. Delete that. Defaulting right now to just this gray, and it wants to close. Yeah. It keeps wanting to close the areas, but we can push it back. Say, hey, behave. Assume that perhaps these setbacks are green. So the paint bucket, there are several different color palettes. The crayons or the colored pencils, this is a flashback to first year with your Prismatic colors. There obviously are other materials, material libraries, asphalt and concrete, things of that nature. Basic colors, the full spectrum, grayscale or color slider. But really, you know, we're just doing these simple things. If you just grab this set of colors here, it usually works pretty well. So we'll pick a green. Yes, you do, when you download from Beacon, it's a PDF, you have to convert it to a JPEG.
There's not a stupid question, but how do I bring the picture in the Sketchup?
I can show you. All right, 3D graphs. So if we Google 3D Warehouse SketchUp, we go to the archived, a simpler time. When SketchUp was owned by Google, people could share models and components on there. So there's a lot of pre-made stuff in 3D Warehouse for SketchUp, entire cities, as you can see for Atlanta here, portions of Indy, lots of furniture and components. So if I just go apartment building, you're going to find a ton of stuff just under various types of apartment buildings. But obviously, not all of these are going to be appropriate for your site. Okay. Some are more appropriate for Beijing or Hong Kong than say for Muncie, Indiana. Some are, okay, but there are some things that have been uploaded by users that have some character. The thing is they have too much, so we may not be interested in all of these polygons or the fact, or whether or not it's geolocated. Some of these models are geolocated, and so they already exist somewhere on Earth and shadow settings and everything like that. So this is Texas, but it has some materials already to it. It may be something we're interested in, may not be something we're interested in. But at any rate, the massing of it could work for us. So if we click download and then tell which version of SketchUp we want to use, when you click download, you'll see that it has a couple of different options. In your case, a 2017 model would be best, and that will just download to your downloads folder. We can then open that as a separate SketchUp file. Do not bring it into your model yet, and you'll see here this is a model that very much has a lot of materials and stuff already in it. For planning, we are not architects, so for planning purposes, this apartment building might be something I want to use in multiple projects. So I'm not interested in all these materials and components. I'm interested in this as a component of massing. And so one of the first things I want to do is using the pointer tool is highlight the model itself, and then control, using the control key or the alt key, I think, I want to explode this thing. And when I explode it, I'm exploding, there are different components and groups already built into this thing. When I do that, I am creating the opportunity for all these subgroups to be editable. Okay. At the moment, when these things are made as groups or subgroups or as components, none of this stuff is editable. So all of these terraces here need to be exploded. I just want to make everything unique and editable. Right now, if we can use the model for sure, but we would have to keep everything in a look and a feel that's extremely detailed and extremely specific. When we're making planning decisions, I don't want the client to get wrapped up in this. I don't want to get the client to get wrapped up into the roof color, the trim color, the brick color. I don't want them to get wrapped up in that. So I'm going to explode everything, just so if I'm going to look for these groups and I'm just going to explode. You can see here the dormers are all groups. Until I think I've got everything, then I will highlight everything. In SketchUp, when you highlight from the left, it gives you a little reminder that, yeah, there are still some groups in here. So I want to explode those. All these decks are groups, and so they need to be exploded. When you highlight things in SketchUp from the left, it will make the selection that is in the selection window. Anything that is contained within the selection window will be selected. When you select from the right, anything that the selection window touches will be selected. These are two major things when you're making selections in SketchUp. When you select from the left, anything that is contained in the selection window will be selected. When you select from the right, anything that your cursor has touched will be selected. Two very important things when you're trying to edit and make changes to things. Just know that when you select from the left, it is different than selecting it from the right. Then, what I will do is paint everything white. Okay? For planning, I want massing to be a brilliant white, or I could paint it the land use color, okay? But for this massing and this diagramming purpose, a white model works fine because it is still recognizable as apartment housing, but it doesn't have all the details of the brick and of the roofing that the client will get completely bent out of shape about, okay? There may be still some components here I want to explode or paint. I'll get that to a point where this building is now very anonymous, okay? This is still a citable source. Someone else still did this. So in terms of academic honesty, I still, in my work, still want to say apartment building by so-and-so. And that's just academic honesty and courtesy to the people who built the model. Now that I've got this thing exploded and completely painted white, I want to make it a group again. Okay? I want to make everything, I highlight everything, I then do a control click, or right mouse click in your case, and make everything a group or make it a component. Two different things there. When you make it a group, it basically becomes one clickable thing. Very easy to move around, cut and paste it in the model, stuff like that. When I make it a component, it still has some of this smartness attached to it. So there's some advantages to making it a component. There's some simplicity to making it a group. So if I make this a component, it's going to ask me, where do I want the foot and what axis do I want the foot of the model to line up to? Right now, the axes are right here. You can see they're just outside of the building itself, and that's pretty good. When you bring this into another SketchUp model, that's going to be the toe, right? So as we move the model around and place it in the model, the toe of this particular component is going to be dragged around when you bring it in. It wants you to give it a name. It wants to know if you're gluing it to a surface at all. Those kinds of questions. For instance, the model wants to be at an angle, that's where you set the axes. Anyway, but I'm going to give this a name, apartment, building, white, create, and then I'm going to save this as apartment, building, white, probably onto my desktop, as a SketchUp model, and I can tell it which version to save it as. So in your case, definitely save it as a 2017 model because we're using 2017 make. Save. Then close out that window. Go back to your other window here. SketchUp file import. Remember, SketchUp wants to know right here, in the lower, it's lower right on the windows, that I'm bringing in a SketchUp model, apartment building white. And we can see there's some things. What's it bringing in here? It's bringing in its base. Not terribly interesting, right? So we need to go back. Right? We don't need the base, do we? No. Delete that out. Save. Back. Import. Apartment building white. Import. A different version here. Yeah. 1:24 p.m. Still has the base, but yeah, so we don't want that base on there. We need to delete that out. We've got a different version here. So once I've got the building white, I can tell it on face there. Zoomed in. Orbit, take a look at it. Right now I have perspective on the camera, so under the camera menu, I may want the perspective on. If not, I turn off the perspective method. You would get a pretty standard view, and we can, from the standard views, we can look at the isometric view. We can look at the top view. Okay. So whatever thing we want to work in, I typically like to work in a pretty loose perspective view, just in terms of moving stuff around, getting stuff placed. And this whole thing is still a group, okay? So if I make a right mouse click, I can copy and paste it several times, or I can just import the model once again. just know that the camera, whether or not you have parallel projection or perspective turn on, will affect the look of your model as you're working in it. Now, we save these as components. The reason we save them as components is because there are features that are sort of attributed to placing a component several times on the site. Here's something really cool. If I do a right mouse click or a control click, I can go edit component, and it will isolate that component against all other instances of that component. So let's just say I make a decision, I make an executive decision. I want my apartment houses to have a really distinctive, stupid feature. Look what's happening. See what's happening? It does it to every instance of the component. Okay? That's kind of cool. Okay? So if you've placed 25 houses on your site and you want to make a change to one of them that affects all of them, if you bring that in as a component, it'll update every instance of it. If you only brought it in as a group, it won't. So that's kind of a cool feature of SketchUp. To get out of that, I press Escape, or I press Control, click, and go back to there. So if you bring these in as components, then you can make a right mouse click, edit the component, and it will update every instance of that component. Now I need to do a Control Z and undo the silliness that I have brought to this model. Okay, so simple land use, simple grid, simple ordering system, simple land use, and now you can grab buildings from the 3D warehouse to start to customize and then bring into your personal library. On Box, I've set up a folder for you to start sharing these things. So on Box, Lauren, Box, not Canvas. So I encourage you to work together and start downloading really good components, really good buildings, okay? So good buildings that would really allow you to collaborate and share. And as you start to share them, just drop them in the box right there so that everybody in the class can share from that. Same thing with Photoshop Entourage. In terms of, as we look ahead towards Photoshop, really good cutouts of people, cutouts of trees, cutouts of cars. Start sharing those in Box as well, so you have access to all of them. The more you collaborate and conquer, the more components that you can build in your personal library, so you can make plans really fast. Okay. Now we can think about exporting this. So a couple of things that have some ideas or thoughts about exporting. I get to a certain point when I want to take this back into GoogleEarth. Chances are I really don't need that image, so I just delete that away. I select my model here, this as a model or a group, and I just make that a group. And make that a group, and then I copy it to the clipboard. I am going to make a new model now. This guy. And I'm going to, the model that we built was scaled, right? But it wasn't geolocated on Earth. So I'm going to, with a new model now, I'm going to geolocate our site. This type of image and resolution is only available in the Pro version, unfortunately. But in either case, the imagery is pretty crappy. It's not great. And so that's why we drew the model based on a scalable GIS map as opposed to an aerial, which might be inaccurate. So I tell it map type, satellite doesn't really matter, okay? Map type, the satellite is going to be a little bit more helpful. Select the region, I then tell the area here, and then import. All right? Now, we could have drawn all of our stuff from this, but there were problems with it. We did not have the accuracy and the information. The mapping that's available for the geolocation in SketchUp now is based on OpenStreet data, which is a wiki site, which is entirely different than GIS. So what I like to do is draw my models based on a sketch that I've made and scanned in, or right off of a GIS image, which is the steps that we did earlier, rather than draw it from this. I do still want to geolocate this model, though, because I think there are important things that we can do when we bring it back into Google Earth. So remember, your model is scaled, so it should theoretically fit, right? And I need to move it up just a little bit because we are dealing with terrain. There is some terrain. See the difference in terrain there? Okay. So I need to move it up a little bit. Move it up about 2 feet. Okay. Now we have our previous model now is geolocated. It now has a place on Earth. So from this second model now, I export a 3D model in the form of a Google Earth file, KMZ. Store site KMZ. Okay? Remember, this is a second model we've made. We've created a geolocation and we've dropped in our work. Okay? Second model, not the original model. I get it, I want to float it above the terrain so that the terrain isn't affecting it. I'm getting ready now to save it as a KMZ file. There are some options here: export in geometry, preserve the credits, export. I then minimize everything else. La da la, la da la. Then I open up Google Earth. Because we have geolocated the second model, it will automatically appear in Google Earth. Okay. Now, the 3D buildings are turned on and the terrain is turned on. What's wrong here? The school is still there. Right. So there are some setbacks in terms of being able to use this imagery in our presentation because all of this information has been built into the model. Okay, so in order to avoid that, we do have to turn off 3D buildings and terrain. And what happens here is that our work now sits flat over the landscape. That still looks pretty good though, because now you can start to see your work in a context. Okay, all right. And then we can pan around it, we can determine, right? Maybe the geolocation wasn't perfect, at any rate. Okay, so unfortunately, for a lot of the cases in which we are tearing down buildings and starting over, the 3D layer does not work terribly well for us. For greenfield sites and brownfield sites, it does. but for the most part, this two-dimensional view works just well enough. I get it to a certain point, keeping in mind where, where north is, okay? And I get that to an angle. Again, I could do plan view, so to keep plan view, I do view, reset, tilt and compass, gives me the overhead view in Google Earth, bless you. I'm allergic to cool things too. So there's that, or we can pan around it, use the different panning tools and the compass tool of Google Earth until we get a 3/4 view that we like. Takes some patience, but it's these tools up here in the upper right that help us pan around and adjust the camera on Google Earth and get us to a place that we're comfortable with. Then we can export this as a high resolution image. So in Google Earth, File, Save Image, it'll ask you some questions in terms of options. So I'm not interested in a title. I'm not terribly interested in a legend. I probably am interested in a north arrow and a compass. And I can tell how this scale is down here, the north arrow is here, and I can tell it how big I want that stuff to be. I can tell it 50% and it'll shrink down, but it's always good to keep the north arrow referenced. Probably don't need that. I then tell Google Earth what resolution to export this to, and our choices go from 1024 by 768 all the way to 4K. Okay, so you have to determine how big of an image you want this thing to be. Of course, HD is pretty close to 11 by 17. And then I save image. So I give it a name, Star. Store site. Arial 1. And then go back to Canvas and we download some stuff. So here's a template I've made for y'all. There are some arrows for y'all that we can actually start to build something in Illustrator. So download that template. That'll open in Illustrator. Download arrows. There's going to be a zip package. Okay. Illustrator should be opening. Should be. Go to flaticon.com. And there are millions of icons that you can use to populate your map. Okay? So analysis map or proposal map, these are all vector-based icons that you can bring into Illustrator and use to populate a map. Okay? So let's say a symbol for a school. Okay? Symbol for housing. There may be a library of symbols and icons that you can start to build, that you can start to diagram with. Okay? These are all, if they are AI or SVG, they are Illustrator ready. So, okay. Wind. There's a good wind icon. So, You can download it either as a portable network graphic, which is good for Illustrator or Photoshop, or as a simplified vector graphic, which is perfect for Illustrator. Okay, yes? Yep. Okay. So download the SVG. You must credit the author, so keep track of your authors. So here's a template for a map. Place now our store site aerial there. I have the reference to the north arrow and the scale, so I can make a graphic scale or adjust the north arrow accordingly, or delete it, whatever. So even if I am coming out of Google Earth, I still have that reference so that I can make a graphic bar scale for my mapping purposes. Where am I? Got too many things open, right? Too many things. Here's Wind SVG. I can copy that to the pasteboard. Paste that directly into an Illustrator file. It's black, which is not great. I just have to change the fill color. And I can start to use shapes and symbols that are pre-made from other authors, provided that I cite them, and start to add diagramming language into an Illustrator document. This is on top of the Google Earth export from Sketchup on top of our land use scenario. From there, we then can start to apply some of our knowledge of Illustrator to make shapes, symbols, or line segments that have informational character. Oops. Gotta use layers too. We can put arrows, we can put text, we can put a solar path, we can put arrows or access points here coming in or out, those sorts of things. Layer that all up into a series of different aerial views that convey the information that we're looking for. Okay. All of that is open source, downloadable, customizable, shareable. Okay. So that should get you started.